Welcome everybody. Today is about sales and operations planning, which is what we care about, what we build a solution for, and which is what Outperform as a company focuses on. And hopefully today it will be clear how we do that, and that we can help you in the areas where you're struggling, and that we can help you to grab the benefits that come from implementing systems and processes. I'll start with a company introduction. And let's open with what makes us wake up every morning, and what do we worry about and what do we care about. And eventually it's this single phrase: give us your data and we will make you a plan. And that's easier said than done, because the data needs to come from different places. The data has different shapes and forms, and turning it all into a plan is not a small task. But yeah, if you persevere, if you put your mind to it, you can reach this point. And we hope to make that journey together with you. Give us your data, and then eventually we will have a plan. A little bit about our history. We're 15 years old, almost 16, sweet 16, and started in 2005. The founders had all had careers in this industry, and at some point reached the idea that whatever we were doing back then in other companies, it could be done better. And that's how we came to the name Outperform. A pitch of optimism, a pitch of arrogance maybe, but also the belief that yeah, if we couldn't outperform the rest of the world, we had no chance to stand. But even more so, that's much less arrogant from our angle, is the system that we build and that we deliver, and the services around it that we deliver, will help you outperform your competition and your earlier state of business. After a short while of considering whether we would be a consulting firm or a product firm, the conclusion was soon reached that we would be a product firm with a software product. We had some initial projects, the way it goes in software industry. Launched a full version in 2009. We moved over via a project with Coca-Cola and made an entry in South Africa. At this point in our history, we took a bold move, because one of the reasons to found Outperform was that we concluded it must be possible to do this in one single system. And back in the days that we founded, it was a lot of systems that had a little bit of a demand planning forecasting module here, and then a bit of scheduling there, and then a bit of inventory optimization in the middle, and then hocus pocus, put it all together in one box and pretend it is one offering. But in the technical area and also in the functional area as a user, it is not one offering. So when we founded, we made a vow to ourselves and said that we must do this in one A to Z system. And as a matter of fact, in the middle of the journey, we came to the conclusion, like, hey, we have more than one system, because we had another technology in the box. And we decided to do away with that technology and replace it by the Groby engine. Then came more market recognition due to marketing and talking to Gartner. Maybe you have found us. We're curious to learn about that later, but maybe you found us via the Gartner reports. And then in the more recent history, we're making the transition to the cloud, and yeah, there's more to come. The essence of our product or of our offering is it worries about the balance between demand and supply. And that may sound simple, because inventory is what I have today, minus what I take out from demand, plus what I have as supply is what I have tomorrow. But to worry about that balance, to worry about that demand, supply, inventory balance across a supply chain with multiple warehouses, with multiple factories, with many products, with products that are made in different layers, that's a job, and that's what the system focuses on. As I mentioned, one solution, running all the way from sales forecasting down to factory scheduling. Doesn't mean that you need to consume that solution all the way in one shot. It's not like the big SAP implementations. you can go with us, have the confidence that everything eventually will be covered, but you can take the journey in steps. And the most logical step to begin is where it all starts with sales forecasting and demand planning. It's built for and used by planners and executives. We find it important that the management has the perspective on the supply chain, but also that the planners themselves can sort of get hands-on and will not be constantly having sort of Excel sheets to the side and run a process to the side, whilst the main process is more like not connected to the details on hand. We want to make sure that the overarching business process and the strategic plans and the medium-term plans, they all marry up to execution. And cost effective. I mean, needs to be in these days, and leave it at that. Gartner places us in the corner of the niche players. I dare say we are indeed a specialist in this domain. We focus quite solidly on the food and beverage industry, which is an industry where we grew up, and an industry also that we like. I mean, nothing is more inspiring than just walking through the supermarket and seeing all these products that you have on the screen as a product code and a product description during the day. That makes you smile, and that makes you feel that you're really engaged with the rest of the world, and the system is not doing something theoretical, but the system is doing real work for real people in the real world. Over the years, we worked with various companies. 80% of our client portfolio is dealing with food or with food-related products. A few case studies. What many of our companies, or many of our prospects worry about is that their processes are all over the place. And at some point that starts to break, at some point that starts to cause headaches and troubles and business continuity risks. And usually that is a trigger for inviting us. And the way we built our system is we really compete head on with Excel. Excel is still a very powerful application, very flexible. So from a user angle, you need to sort of be as good as Excel or better. And usually one of the criteria of success for a project is, have we been able to move out all these different Excel systems, and is there now one system of reference that worries about the planning? Again, chose Outperform because of the deep experience across software and food and beverage industries. And the solution is intuitive, and it has shelf life constraints. So that's a typical example where our focus on the food and beverage industry made us win this account. And the other thing to say about this account is it started in UK with a little bit of spreading to the other European countries. Just last year, they decided to go into Asia and launched a business in China as well as in Japan, and bite off some more Outperform software and another Outperform project. This is a recent client. They've just gone live before summer, so we're in the phase of aftercare, and there's always a phase two to projects because one of the two factories ran behind due to personnel availability. So we're doing that chapter 2. So recent development, and again, chose us for being one system. We're slowly getting towards the demo. I've allowed you control, Raj? Yes, it should be.
Yes. Okay, thanks, Unico. So what I'd like to do is give you a demonstration of Outperform Planning. And the data set that we have today is a chocolate business. And it's got 3 facilities, one in Dallas, another one in Philadelphia, and finally one in Brussels. So there's seasonality of the demand because of the Thanksgiving and the Christmas time. there's a surge in demand, and we're going to see how we're going to balance our capacity against that. And we also have transfers between these sites. So it's a fully contained supply chain, and that's what we're going to be looking at today. And to kind of start with, from an application perspective, so this is what the application looks like. On the left, you would see that there are different sections that covers your entire supply chain. As Unico mentioned, we have sales, supply, scheduling, all together in one single application. And when we're talking about supply, we're also talking about everything that you have that you could buy, you could make, or you can transfer from another site. So it's not just production, it's also distribution planning and also purchase planning that we're talking about on the supply side. And from a scheduling perspective, it is going to be down to the detail level scheduling. So the idea behind this is that we have one tool that covers the entire supply chain, which also means that it gives you visibility across the entire supply chain, so that it's not that you have different islands, that everybody's got their own data, and you have different versions of the plan and not quite sure whether we're all working on that one number plan. So the objective here is a one number plan. At the same time, you would also see that we have something called as a dashboard. So what we have done here, so the application is a Windows native. It's .NET C# running on top of a SQL Server database. And instead of kind of creating our own business intelligence, what we did was we took Microsoft Power BI. It's the leader in the marketplace, and we embedded it within the application. So one of the standard thing that we have is the KPI. Now this KPI that you're looking at in terms of the total revenue, the service level, the days of cover, inventory turns, this is based on the plan data. So if you're creating a plan for 18 months, or you're creating a plan for 5 years, this report is actually looking at that planning data lake and indicating what is this value of the plan. So what we're trying to emphasize here is that we're not talking about volumes all the time. We also talk in euros and cents to kind of give you a perspective that what does this plan actually cost me from a revenue perspective, from a total cost perspective. So you have an idea of if we were to execute this for the next 18 months or next 5 years, this is what you're looking at in terms of costs and turns. And as you might be familiar with Power BI, it also allows you to slice and dice it, where you can select these different types, like if you're going to just look at your A products, and it automatically filters it down to kind of give you a perspective of what that means by just looking at A. So again, the richness of Power BI can be that you can benefit from by having this tied on top of what we have as the planning data lake. Now, similarly, you could also see this from a sales perspective. From a sales perspective, you can kind of see all these different graphs and charts that slices and dices it. And what this is about is that you have a high-level overview of the plan, and it's this the management overview. But at the same time, if I were to kind of select a particular account manager in this case, you could kind of see what is their contribution from a revenue and also from a cost and margin perspective. And what you'll also notice is that there is a strip that came out at the bottom, which is what we call as a navigator. So what this one does is that it kind of doesn't require a great detail of understanding of the tool by such, but by having this navigator at the bottom, we say that if you were to select a particular point in this report, we can tell you that you might be interested in looking at the demand by country, or the revenue by week, or the forecast. So these are the common reports that you would be interested in to kind of see further from that account manager perspective. So what we're trying to make sure is that this is easily navigatable, and you don't need to know your way through the tool for you to kind of get into the details. Okay. So that's where the dashboard comes into play, just to kind of give you the high-level overview. And the next thing that we have is the news. So what the news actually does is that we have these agents that are searching through your planning data lake and finding newsworthy items. Now, these newsworthy items could be things that are an opportunity, could also be something that's a threat, and something that's also neutral, which is something like what happened since our last planet, Did I have any new products that came up? Okay. And if you were to kind of look at these exceptions from a threat perspective, you can also see that I've got 224 incidents that have happened. Now, if you were just to look at 224 incidents, you might be wondering, do I have time for going through all this, or how do I spend my time? So what we did here is we did a Pareto analysis that looks at it and says, let me kind of categorize this from a revenue perspective, what the impact would be. And you could see that, listen, this small bit here actually has a considerable amount from a dollars and cents perspective. So what we do is we rank these incidents in such a way that you could be more effective with your time, rather than kind of go through all 224 items. If I were to just look at just the ones that make a difference, and here you could see that the ones that are high are actually kind of contributing this much, and the ones that are medium contribute this much, but you've got a long tail, and the long tail actually doesn't do much from a value perspective. By ranking it, what we're also helping you to do is being more effective with your time. And this exception talks about in terms of what kind of exception is this? Is this a potential out of stock, below minimum, above maximum? And what product code are we talking about? Which location is it being affected? And what's the time frame where the issue is happening? So right away, you can kind of say, this is kind of being more effective with my time. And if I would just say, let me kind of filter on all the out of stock exception, because that's really where I would make a difference. And then here you can see all the out of stocks and the products and the time frame and the location that's having that impact. Okay, so if I were to take one of these products, let's just take F111, I have the ability to inspect it. So what this one does, it kind of dives straight into what we call as the workbench. Now, workbench is what brings all the disparate set of data together in one place with enough of color coding to indicate where the risk or the threat happens. Okay. In this case, you're looking at the location where the product is, Dallas, and this is a product that we're looking at, the milk chocolate, and it's for the opening inventory. This is the physical inventory that you have in stock in that location. It also has the physical inventory because there could be some stuff that's on QA hold that's not released yet, because it could be that I've got a 2-day hold automatically after it's being produced. So physically I have the stock, but it might not be something that I could use to meet the demand. I also have a target inventory. Now this could be based on the days of cover. I want to maintain 15 days of cover or 30 days of cover if you're in a make to stock environment. And I have what we call as unmet demand. This is the potential that you won't be able to meet the demand based on capacity constraints or material availability. You also have a total demand, which is some of your customer demand and dependent demand. The customer demand, if it's a finished product that you're selling, and if it's a material or a semi-finished or work in process, then you might not have customer demand because you don't sell those, but you will have dependent demand for that. It'll also give you visibility as to what drove the requirement for it. And finally, you also have a supply plan.
I'd like to add the dependent demand is also in the warehouse dimension. So if there's a customer-facing warehouse that serves the customers, then in that warehouse, you usually only have customer demand, but that can be sourced from an intermediate warehouse and then from the plant. And that demand for the customer then rolls up as dependent demand into the layers above. So this is the main inventory balance monitor, as we call it, which is where the demand supply inventory balancing is shown. And see, this is where you can see that inventory is climbing up, and you get the graphical representation.
So as I was mentioning, you have all this different information, but one of the things that normally drives your business is to kind of start flipping reports, because now you need to see what's behind it. So what we've done here is we have given all that information in one single place. And if you were to click on this, it automatically tells you the different lots and when they're expiring, because if shelf life is a big deal for you, then we can kind of start tracking of it in terms of saying that we have these different lots that are expiring at different times. And we also have customer demand that also has requirements that it has to have certain best before dates. So we can also use that to kind of calculate truly what is required from a demand perspective. And here you can see that from a customer demand perspective, drilling down automatically tells you that this customer demand is based on these actual customer orders, and these are the quantities, these are the customers that make up the total. Okay. Similarly, if you were to kind of look at this from a material perspective or from a perspective, you could see that this is the product, this is a schedule, this is the batch number, and this is the line it's running on for 43 minutes, and these are the inflow products. Okay, so what we also do is an instantaneous material requirement planning based on the supply plan that we come up with. And when it comes to the unmet demand, by drilling down on this, you can automatically see what part of the demand that we're not able to meet. Was it a forecast, or was it actual customer orders that's at risk? Okay, so with this color coding, you could see that this is when the inventory is going below the target. And you can also see that you have red to indicate that you're kind of stocking out. Now, the best part is that if I were to kind of take out this location filter and I filter on this further, it gives you all the locations that the product is available in. Now, if you kind of look at this, you could see that there is plenty of stock in Philadelphia, but you don't have enough in Dallas. And you could say that, listen, there's no need to kind of change the schedule or change the plan, because we have enough over here that meets the requirement together. And that's where the monitor comes into play, because you can just select these different time periods, go to the monitor, and then kind of click on the cumulative graph, the inventory balance graph that's cumulative. And by clicking on any of this, because the gray area is the inventory, and this is the supply that you have. And by clicking on any of these points, you can automatically see that, the combined part of it has got 7 days of stock. So we should be pretty good, because I don't have to physically move the stock. It's just a question of fulfilling the demand from a different location. So by not having to even move the product, I can automatically see what I have in terms of days of cover. So that's where the powerful nature of it comes along, and providing with that level of detail. And as you could also notice that by pulling some of these things together, it's just like what you've used in Excel. It does average, count, and sum. So it's very user-friendly, because this is what you're used to from an Excel perspective, and we try to keep the same look and feel and the same function keys, so you don't have to learn new things in order to make this work. Okay. Now, if I were to kind of take out those products, just want to kind of show you from a material perspective. We also have information that covers the material. So let's just look at just Dallas. Okay, so if you can, like Unico was mentioning, you can see this dependent demand. And if you were to click on this dependent demand, you could see that the demand for the nibs is driven by the chocolate liquor. And if you were to click on this further, you can say that, listen, I need this chocolate liquor. And what's driving it? It's because we're making so much of cocoa powder, and we're also making so much of the almond chocolate. And if I were to look at the dependent demand across, you can also see that this is actually going into making the almond chocolate. So the point I'm trying to make is that we accommodate multiple levels of bill of materials. And by linking the bill of materials along to the supply plan, we're also able to come up with a material requirement plan, which kind of takes into account the open purchase orders. It also kind of takes that and then says how much of more material that you need to buy in order to fulfill the need for this plan. Okay. Now, going back to the news, we were looking at the inventory exception, which was the threat. And what I'd like to do is now go to the new products. Now, I'm trying to kind of tailor this towards what we gleaned from the presentations that you made. So if you're kind of wondering why I'm going to certain topics, it's just trying to kind of cover as much as I can based on your pain points. Okay. So what really happens is that we try to have an integration with the ERP system. So there's a nightly refresh of the data. So if new products have been set up, then we get a new product that's automatically figured out by the news item. And these new items have been created since you last updated the system. And when I click on this item, you can see that now I have an inspect, acknowledge, ignore the news, but I also have workflows. So what does a workflow do? if I were to start the workflow, what we've done is we've taken your business process and converted that into a series of steps. So your business process might call for, if a new product comes along, this is really what I want my planners to do, or the person owning the new product to do. This ensures repeatability. It also measures the duration that the person spent on fulfilling the task. Because you can say that, I think this is a 1-day task, or creating a sales plan is going to be a 7-day task. You can assign different durations for the tasks, and then you can measure compliance, not just to the steps involved, but also to the duration. So in this case, I am going to select that particular product, and then I'm going to go through the steps that we have to in order to kind of complete the new product setup. Okay. The first one that you see here is that I've got the product and the description that came from the ERP system. I can also have certain attributes like chocolate type that can come in. But at the same time, you would see that there are all these different other attributes that I can fulfill. And I'll show you the next one, like package. You got these attributes that you can fill. And you can either do this from the interface into SAP if the data exists there. If it doesn't exist there, we have what we call as data shelter that allows you to manage all this information. So this step is about assigning forecast category. And if I look at the forecast category, I have either the default, which is what I want to go with, or I would say that, no, this is a product that I want to manually forecast. Okay. But we also have another attribute that we can also manage. Now, this is not something that you want to manage for a brand new product, but if it's a product that's going out of its birth, or it's kind of going to be written off, you're not going to be planning for it anymore, you can also start putting in a forecast end date. The forecast end date allows you to kind of manage until what date would we like to be forecasting for this particular product. Okay, so after I finish that step, I go to the next step. And then before that, it'll ask me, do you want to mark the previous step as completed? And I say yes. And you can automatically see that that step is getting crossed out. And we go to the next one, which is the item customer perspective. Now, the ERP system might have it activated, and we try to read it as much as we can. But if not, you will have a radio button that you can check in and say that I want to activate this particular customer to be buying this particular product. Okay. You also have other attributes like introduction date. You can kind of say, listen, the product is sped up, but we're not going to be planning for this at least 3 months from now, because there's all this processes that you have to go through before the product gets launched. So the code might be set up, you might start planning for it, but it's not ready for sale until 3 months from now. And that is where the introduction date comes in. And you also, again, have another facility to not say that the product is getting expired, we don't want to forecast for it, but you can also control it by saying that for this customer, from this date onwards, you would like to stop selling to that customer. So we also have the ability to control the sunset date by customer. Okay, you have a sunrise date, and you also have a sunset date that kind of shows when we will stop selling to a particular customer. Okay, now I can finish that one, and then I come to the next step, which is the product super session. Now, when I come to the product super session, this is where you can create virtual history. So you can kind of select the product and say that I want to use F692. So this is the product that I'm interested in. And I can kind of copy this for a particular customer or all your customers. And I can also pick an existing product that are closely linked to it. You can say that, listen, if I were to kind of use this milk chocolate, it's the closest that we're going to get. And I could use this to copy the history and kind of say that I can cannibalize it. And I can kind of take 50% of that history and from this date to this date. So this way, for a product that's brand new, you can also kind of create a virtual history. And with that virtual history, you can get the product set up. And once the actual history comes along, and that will replace, going forward, what would be the product data. Okay, I don't want to go through all these steps, but I just want to kind of show you in terms of new product introduction. It doesn't come as a surprise. You could kind of have a workflow built around it. And you can also kind of make sure that people follow the right steps. It doesn't mean that the main person, when she is in town, it's all fine. But then the replacement or the substitute who's there to kind of fill in when the person is on vacation, he doesn't know what to do. We have a workflow that guides the process, and we have also a workflow that ensures that compliance is happening in terms of following the processes. Okay. Now, once the workflow is complete, the next step would be to kind of say, look at all the different workflows. I mean, I can just quickly show you the definition. So the definition means that you can customize these workflows, and you can create your own training workflows that says, these are the different steps in terms of who can actually do it. Does it have to be a supply planner or a demand planner, or what kind of person can do it? It also kind of has all these different steps that you can kind of put together in the right sequence. And you can also have a duration and say, what is the stated duration for this workflow, and measure compliance towards that, which is what we're going to be doing now by looking at the past workflows and saying, I got all these different workflows that are getting archived, and I'd just like to see how well are we compiling against it. In this case, you could kind of say that this is the time frame that we're looking at, and this is the percentage completion, and you could kind of see the different steps that they went through and finishing it off to make the 100%. If you were to look at this from a sales plan perspective, the timeline is such a way that you see the gray line. The gray line is what is the default timeline, completed it, and you could kind of see them kind of jumping all over the place, which means that in some steps, they're ahead of it, and in some steps, they are behind the curve, and at the end of it, by the time they finished it, they didn't actually get it done on time. They were actually a day or two behind. So this kind of a burn chart indicates which step did they get caught on, and also kind of seeing that, listen, if we have issues in not having compliance to the process, we can kind of say, which step is it that we're getting stuck in? Is it maybe approving the forecast, or maybe it's creating the forecast that's taking more time? Then you can look at that step and say, how do we mitigate this? How do we ensure that we can minimize the risk involved here? Is it because we need to have more people assigned to do the approval, or should we have somebody else also having authority to create the forecast? By looking at this and studying it over time, you can kind of see where you're getting stuck and what needs to be done to kind of improve your process and improve compliance to the timeline that you set out for processes to be completed. So coming to the sales part of it, now we've kind of looked at the news, the workflow. We have gone through the day in the life of a planner. We're looking at the high-level results. You're looking at exceptions, so opportunities that you can fulfill. We're coming down to the sales. So from a sales perspective, you see these different reports that are kind of grouped together. The first thing that you want to look at is what we call as data shelter. We believe that data is a crucial piece that ties all this together in terms of the quality of the plan. If you were to just look at this and say, listen, I created all the plan and everything is good, but then I realized that the parameter was not right, or I missed a new customer, or something like that happened. So which is why we put an emphasis on the data side of it, and that's where data shelter comes into play. So what data shelter tries to do is get as much of data as you can from the ERP system or any other system that you might have as a system of record. But we also have the ability to add data that doesn't exist. So it could be attributes that we like from a reporting perspective or from a forecasting perspective. So what we do is allow you to manage those things over here so that you don't have people managing various Excel files and VLOOKUPs because they're used to reporting it in a particular format. So in this case, you can see all these finished products, and you can see that I have the package, I have the chocolate type, but at the same time, I have all these different description fields that you could see, like product description 20. So I have all these extra fields that you can add to, and you can caption it and call it something else that fits your business. And this way, you can enhance the data that you have from a planning perspective, maintain it according to the code and the description that you get from the ERP, so you're complying with the overlying data structure and you're not creating things that don't exist. But at the same time, you're able to enhance it with data that helps you from a planning perspective. So that's where data shelter comes into play. And we have different reports depending on where you are. as to all the different data shelter reports. But moving on from a forecast perspective, so our forecasting relies on either the sales history or the shipment history. And we can accommodate different bucket sizes. It doesn't always have to be calendar months. We can also do 445. We can also do custom weeks. So your week could not just be Monday to Saturday or Monday to Sunday, but you can also have different calendars. So the system is very flexible in accommodating different calendars. And from a forecasting perspective, we could either use the shipment history or the sales history. And what you see here is the product description, and the customer total. So the total for all the customers year over year. So you can see the years stacked up on top of each other. And the green denotes the historical data, and the yellow denotes the future forecast. Okay, and this is an SKU notation. And we also handle different units of measure. It doesn't always have to be SKU. If you can have the revenue numbers or the standard cost from your ERP fed into the system, we can automatically convert between these different units at all times. You can make changes in different units. You can report against different units. You're not limited to just these 6. It's just a standard that we have set up, but you can have your own unit of measure to make it useful from a reporting perspective. You can also see that I've got the totals at the end of each year. I also have the decrease or increase year over year. Now, if I were to click on the small button here, you could see that I've got all these different customers that are buying to make up the total. And in this particular perspective, I've set this to be a product customer dimension, but it doesn't always have to be this way. You can decide based on your business requirement whether this is the appropriate way to set it up, or it should be a brand, or it should be a country level. You can kind of slice and dice this data in any different way from a forecasting perspective. So getting the historical data over here, which is all the green that you're looking at, I've got all these yellows. The first step is always to kind of call for the forecasting engine. So the forecasting engine, when you call it, it creates the statistical baseline forecast. So in this case, I'm not going to call it, but I'm just going to show you that by calculating all forecast, the menu option comes up and says, would you like to run the forecasting engine? And that would create the baseline forecast. Once I create the baseline forecast, the next step, so this is what I was talking about. So you can kind of have different groups that you build this up. So you can divide your data in terms of business units or brands. You can kind of divide them up and say, like, I like to run the forecast only for this BU, or I would like to run it for this brand. You can divvy up the data, give access based on that, and also run forecasting engine based on that.
An idea there. Regular client has something in between 4 to 6 forecast strategies, all dedicated to different portions of its business. And yeah, different portions need different treatment. One portion may be good to be forecasted a month, and another portion of the business needs more accuracy because it's all more short term and needs to be forecasted on weeks. So somewhere around 4 to 6 free to be configured strategies is what the common Outperform client works with.
So once you have the statistical baseline forecast that the forecasting engine comes along with, this is where the collaboration starts. Now the collaboration could be as simple as the BU leaders or the business units kind of have a perspective that the system doesn't know. And they say that, listen, we're not going to settle for a decrease here. We're actually going to go with a 3% increase in sales. And you can see that automatically the system prorates it down to all the different customers that this product belongs to. You don't have to wait for a nightly job. Everything is done instantly. And you can see that proportionally, what should each customer do so that I can have a 3% on the top. I can also kind of change or pull down any of these rows. And by pulling down the rows, you got the seasonality, and you can adjust the seasonality and say that I would like to kind of make these in a different form. And then on that, I can put this in terms of volume. Okay, I can put this in terms of volume as to what that would be, and then say this should be 12,000. So you can kind of change the seasonality that you have based on history and provide your own seasonality, and then put this change in terms of the 12,000, and you can see this automatically getting aggregated to the top. So proration aggregation across your different levels in the demand pyramid is done instantly. Now, this indicates that you have this change, but nothing gets changed until you hit the save. And the minute you hit the save, the data is getting refreshed at the customer or the customer dimensions or the product dimensions. So if you were to kind of switch this over and now look at it from a brand perspective, you will see the latest number. Like I said, it's as instantaneous as we can from a proration aggregation perspective.
These type of features, they're primarily useful in the budgeting phase. Normally, in the rolling operational plan, you wouldn't be making this big kind of changes that Raj is now indicating. But
yeah,
strategic planning, saying your optimistic, realistic, and pessimistic scenario, being able to change the growth at a high level, saying, okay, what happens if I do 3% more, is a very powerful approach, of course.
Okay, so I don't want to save this changes. I want to just discard it. So the best part, again, from a collaboration perspective, is also to share this with others. So you can export every report that you see in Outperform into an Excel file. And if you have the ability to edit because of the yellow cells, you can edit it and bring it back into the system. So for example, if you have a customer that you want to share this with, you can export this into Excel, have people share changes, make changes, and then you can import it back in. And it allows you the flexibility to kind of also do this in sharing and not sharing with others in Excel.
When you export, you get exactly the same picture as what you got in the system. You get exactly the same editability. If I do 800 here, then I change it to 800. You can save this, and if you want to, you import it. And then once you import it, you get to see the changes that were imposed from the Excel sheet, and then you can confirm whether you like to keep the changes. You see the 2 times 800 that I had in the spreadsheet, they come in as if you were editing them in the application itself. You can preview the changes or review the changes and then decide to save or discard.
We can also manage promotions. So in this product, you could see that I have T, R, and a P. Previously, you had only the R. T is the total, R is the regular forecast, which is the baseline forecast that you create, and P is the promotional volume that you have. Now, if I were to kind of look at this and then say, let me look at my promotions. Okay, here you can see that you have 2 promotions running at the same time, and it is on a particular customer. It's got a date range that you're going for, and we're talking about uplift in terms of how much uplift had happened, or it can also have it from a volume based. And when the actuals come along, we can also measure this in terms of what did we kind of get in terms of this promotion and the performance of the promotion, okay, and the profitability analysis. So that's one of the ways to kind of manage on the promotion side of it. The other one is also, we have a GUI version of the same, and this allows you to kind of say, let's just say this is 20% promo, 20% more. You can kind of pick your product and say which product you want to apply to. And this could be for 15 days. And you can kind of select all customers that are going to be applied to. And you can say, we believe that this is going to account for a 15% increase in sales. And that's the uplift that we're talking about. So you can kind of manage your promotion through this and duplicate it. And when the actions come along, we can tie it together back to the promotion. And this way, you know the effectivity of the promotion. Okay. Now, moving to the next question, which was the different sales plans. So what we have here is the ability to create multiple plans. So you can have a plan that's anointed to be the budget plan. You can have a monthly update. You can have a monthly plan that you have. You can also have a plan that is a pure statistical forecast. You can also have a plan that is a collaborative version of it. You can have a management version of it, which is just putting 5% and 3% all over the place. It's all these different plans that you can create, and you can kind of say what is the basis in terms of the range that you want to plan for, and whether you want to have it in weeks or months. And you have these different statuses. So when you create a plan, it goes from a work to a revision to an approved status, and finally you publish it. And one of the plans you can take and mark it to be the budget plan. So it gives you the flexibility to create more than one plan at the same time. And this way, when you're kind of looking at the actuals, and a waterfall would be a good place to kind of check this against. And in a waterfall diagram, you can say who was closer to the truth. Now, the blue line being the actuals, you can have this budget plan, you have your monthly estimates, and then you can see that from a color-coded perspective. You know, we were planning quite well. The last month's estimate was off quite a bit, but otherwise, all our budget plans and our first and second month updates were all pretty good. And in this case, you can see that we have not been doing good on the Fed part of it because we're off from the actual. So by having these different plans, you can kind of put them into waterfall diagrams. And you can also compare this in terms of the sales plan versus the realization. And then you can kind of compare this in terms of plan comparison. And from a plan comparison perspective, you can see this and say, what was the budget plan? And where's this monthly update that I have? And what was the difference between them? So how are we tracking against the budget? So we got all these standard reports out of the box that automatically does a lot of this analysis for you. Another interesting report would be from a realization perspective. So if you're kind of looking at your plan and saying, how well am I doing from a realization perspective? We have the ability to kind of show you by chocolate type, by customer, what was the forecast, and how much did we have in terms of quantity that has been shipped so far, how much has been unshipped, and what was the realization, and what was the deviation from the plan. So this also is another report, keeps track of how the orders are coming in against the forecast that you have. And this report allows you the flexibility to slice and dice this in any particular type. So you don't also always have to see this from a product perspective. You can also see this from a chocolate type and a customer code and by company as to what that looks like. You can even take out the customer and say, I just want to see this from a chocolate type as to what I have. Or you can also add the account manager to this and say that I would like to see by company and by account manager. So the system is quite flexible in the perspective of every report is customizable in terms of being able to select the dimensions that you'd like to see this in, and also the unit of measure that you'd like to see this in. And it's not always that you're stuck with having to see this at the product or the customer level at all times. So just one last report, which is the sales profitability. I can show you by chocolate type how much of revenue you made and what did you just all that. So you have an idea of what that looks like. So with that, I would like to switch over to supply side of it. On the supply side of it, what we have from a data shelter perspective, the products, the warehouse, the supply parameters. So let me start with the resources. So this talks about all the work centers that you have in one particular facility. These are the different lines that I have. And from a resource details perspective, it tells you which products are made on those lines. Okay, let me take out the product code. So what are the different pieces of information I need from a planning, supply planning side of it? The first and foremost thing is I like to know which products can be made on which line and what would be the rate at which I'm making it, what would be the efficiency, and what would be the production cost. Now, the idea behind this is that if you have this rate coming in from the ERP system, and from a planning perspective, you know that, listen, we never achieve 440, we only can make 320. It provides you the ability to override it and say that turns indicate that it's not a ERP number, it's a planning number that you have. So every number that you get from ERP as a parameter can be overridden from a planning perspective, but we mark which one you overrode so that you know that if I ever want to go back to what that actual number was, I just go back to reset to ERP, and it provides me with the number that I had prior to that override that I did. So that's the powerful aspect of it. Now, from supply perspective, I need to know the rate at which I'm making it. I also need to know the bill of materials. So if I were to kind of look at this in terms of my bill of material details, okay. So the bill of material can have effective dates. It also can have alternate bill of materials. So in this case, you can see the dark chocolate. This is the bill of material. And this, again, we get from the ERP system. These are the different quantities that needs to go into it. And there's no effective dates in this right now, but you can have effective dates as to having this bill of material working. So you have the bill of material. You have the rate at which you're producing it. The next thing that you would be interested in is the supply parameters. You have transport parameters and supply parameters. So let's go to the supply parameter. Now the supply parameter is the one that brings all the parameters that you need from a supply perspective. So if you take each and every item that you have in a particular location, it tells you whether the default is the make, transport, or buy. And it tells you, based on that information, how much bill of materials and how many resources I can make it on. I also have the ability to kind of have these different batch sizes that you want to buy it in or make it in and transport in, which we have as the minimum order size and the order size. You have order lead time. If you have a transport lead time, you can kind of put that in. There's a hold time. That's just an automatic QA hold time before it becomes available. I also have shelf life so that we can either set the product to expire once it reaches shelf life and trigger more production. And you also have safety cover that it should target towards. Okay. Now this supply parameter is what we kind of use as a way to drive most of the production. And we also have supply calendar. So what the supply calendar does, it kind of gives you the days of the week as a default, when you can receive a product or when you like to make a product. This also helps you to set up manufacturing cycles. There could be products that you make once every 3 weeks or once every 2 weeks. We have this calendar that allows you to set it up also to be made once every 2 weeks or 3 weeks. So this way the system has to make once till it can be made again. So you don't have to figure out how much the production should be. System can also handle manufacturing cycles and these different dates when you can actually produce a product or receive a product. Okay, that's where the supply calendar comes along. We also have the resource capacity. Okay. Again, the idea is to get as much of data as we can from your existing system. And if it doesn't, data shelter is here for you to manage it. In this case, you can see that these are the different lines I have in Dallas. And once I have these different lines, this is the default capacity I have. And I can also change this over time. It doesn't always have to be default. You can say that, 1st of Jan, I want to have a downtime across all the lines in the particular plant. So you can also manage the calendar. So what we have here is the routing information, which line can make the product. We also have the bill of material that ties up all the different products, and it could be multi-level deep. We also have the supply parameters as to if I make it or if I buy it, what is the minimum order quantity, what is the lead time involved in it. I also have the supply calendar that indicates when, what is the manufacturing cycle that I have. I also have the capacity available in terms of all these different lines. Given this, I have the opening inventory. I know what is already been what's already been kind of scheduled from a production perspective. Now this takes me to the next step, which is let me create the plan. Now to create the plan, I can either do this from a heuristic perspective, or I can do this as an optimization. So when you're ready to create the plan, this menu comes up, and the plan can either be an optimal plan or could be a heuristic plan. Optimal plan is where we are running an optimization engine. It can do a cost optimized plan that looks at all the variable costs that you have in the network. And based on that, it can come up with a plan that says, based on the cost, this is the optimal plan to create. Now, the alternate that we have is to also create the plan heuristically. Now, if you create the plan heuristically, what this one does, it kind of does a good job in doing batch sizes that the optimization always struggles with. It can take batch sizes into consideration. It can consider changeovers into consideration and come up with a capacity constrained plan. for a given plant or many plants at the same time. So if I were to select this and say I would like to create a plan, and I can go by a plant, and I can also say the number of days I want to create the plan for, and the system will automatically create the plan heuristically, and it is done in a few minutes. Once I create the plan, I have the capacity plan that I created, which would be the heuristic plan. Now, this heuristic plan will give me the details in terms of all the different lines that I have in Dallas, and it'll also tell you the utilization that the system projected based on what we had. So all these different lines, as I remember, there's a time fence that talks about initially we have production orders in place, so you can't override the production orders. The system is locked, but that point onwards, it starts coming up with a plan. It tells you what the planned quantity would be, what the utilization would be, and it also tells you how much of time would you be spending on changeover and coming up with the plan.
All these light green numbers, they represent supply, and supply has been calculated by the algorithm. All the light green has been calculated. It's just the first portion of the horizon where you are locked in from the decisions that you already took. And leave it to that. I mean, for us it's obvious, right? But maybe this.
Correct. So you see, these are the different products that were made on that line, and you could see the quantity that was produced from the batch sizes that we have, the minimum and the multiple order sizes. It also indicates how much of time was spent on making all these different products. It also tells you how much of time was spent on changeover. So it could be that, if I were to do all the batch sizes, and if I had to consider changeover, because there's a 45-minute changeover, I can't make more than 4 products in a day. So the system can also take that into consideration and make sure that changeover is part of the plan, and it kind of gives you a feasible plan from that perspective. Okay. And another interesting report that you get out of this is what we call as the unmet demand. Now, from the unmet demand perspective, look carefully that this is the plan that we created for the 278 days. And this is the location we are talking about. These are the different finished products that we're making. This is all bulk. And here you see the different columns in terms of the planned quantity, in terms of what the demand was for the time horizon, what part of the demand I could not meet because of capacity constraint. It tells you what percentage of the demand you could not meet. And based on the average price or value of the product, I can project this is the revenue that the plan is creating. This is the revenue that you're losing because you didn't make that particular product. And based on, I can also say this is the demand on production costs. And this is a reduction in cost because you didn't make all the different products that you have. And the margin that you finally see is how much margin do each of these products actually make for me. And if you didn't make all the demand, you can also see that this is the margin that you've lost. So the point of the exercise is that we're not always talking volumes. You can see that capacity constraint plan utilization, and all the different systems. What we're doing here is to take some extra effort to also convert this in terms of euros and cents and tell you the bottom line, what this means. Now here you see there's a product priority that kind of drove the optimization. You could take the margin and say that, listen, margin is what is going to drive our business. You can copy the margin, paste it here, and let the system run against that margin. And now it will optimize it and say that, the products that make the highest margin, I'll make that product first. Then comes the rest. Because here you see that this product actually makes a good margin, whereas that is being short. Whereas the products that make no margin or very little margin are ending up making all the different volumes that it's asked for. So something is not quite right in terms of how you set up the optimization. But what I'm saying is we could use margin as a driver that kind of comes up with the right supply plan. Now, once you create the plan, you saw the capacity plan that we had. And what this also does, it kind of gives you the operating cost. Now, the operating cost kind of says this is what we have captured in terms of inventory cost, purchase cost, production cost, and transport cost. And this is by chocolate type, and this is by warehouse. You can also kind of slice this and dice this and have brands and packs and all these different things and say, what does it cost? And where is the cost going from a primary basis, and can report against that. Okay, that's on the operating cost. You also have your utilization. Now, from a resource utilization, It also tells you what is the cumulative not used hours, which then becomes the capacity they promise. So if sales ever ask this question, hey, we have this opportunity, do you think we can accept it? You can tell them like, yeah, if you kind of look at August and you can commit to it, I can promise you this many hours because this is what the system is saying in terms of how much we spent in terms of production, how much we spent on changeover, and what's totally available after meeting all the requirements, which would be the cumulative unused hours. Okay. Similarly, we can also project the warehouse utilization. And what the warehouse utilization says is that based on the plan you created, based on the inventory plan that you came up with, I can also tell you that your warehouse is going to be okay now, but as you go into the future, that could be a potential that you're running out of space. And once you see that, listen, over this time frame, we should be looking at getting some more warehouse because the system is projecting that we could be running out of space. Now, if you can also show the details, it tells you which product actually would be occupying most of the space. And it could be that you change the sourcing or tell the customer needs to pick from a different warehouse because we don't have space in this particular warehouse. So it triggers all these different discussions that you could have in terms of what that warehouse utilization could do to you in terms of your plan. Okay. The next one is the consolidated slice and dice. Now, from a consolidated slice and dice, I'm just looking at it from a Dallas perspective, and I can report on what would be the opening inventory that I have on and the total demand and the total supply. But I can also say this is what I see as the opening inventory for all these different chocolate types into the future. Each one of these periods, what do we see as to be the opening inventory? And I can switch this and say it's not just SKU I'd like to see it in. Maybe I want to see this in kilos. And I can now see this also in kilos as to what that corresponds to. So it kind of flips between all these different units. It tells you what you have in terms of opening inventory, what would be the total supply that we are planning for, that we have for all these different for packaging or the different chocolate types that I have, what would be the total supply, total demand out of the plan. I can also say what is the delivery plan. Okay, purchase plan deliveries. This gives you a perspective out into the future saying that what would be buying from a packaging material perspective into it by month. And I can say this is what is firmed and what is the planned quantity, or you just kind of look at this from a planned quantity as to what do we have by chocolate type. And as I said, it doesn't always have to be chocolate type. Here you can just take the chocolate type out and put your product into it. So there's so much to show. And if you can see this from a near term, we also have a purchase order export because we know the bill of material. We have done an explosion of the bill of material based on the supply plan. We can also tell you that, listen, this is the item that you need to buy from this particular supplier. And this is when you should order. And based on the lead time, when you receive it. And by checking these boxes, what we attempt to do is to kind of create purchase proposals in the ERP system, not purchase orders, because your job is to still convert that in terms of an order. So similarly, you can do this for the transport part of it, the production part of it. You can kind of see what the plan suggests you should be doing and how you should be executing upon it. So you can have your fence that says, I'd like to export for the next 2 days or next 3 days or next week. You can kind of select all this, and like you do in Excel, you can just do Control-Shift-V, select a bunch of cells, and then once you save it, then the system kind of picks it up next time and then pushes it across and creates all these proposals in the ERP system. So that's what this kind of amounts to from a supply side of it. Okay, same thing I have as the transport order export, production order export. I've got all these different things. Now, one more thing I want to do that is before we go to, let me just quickly do scheduling. So what do you really need from a scheduling perspective apart from what the plan did? The plan has actually done all the batching in terms of how much you need to be producing on that given line. It also knows the changeover. It also knows the production cycle that you only can make it on a Wednesday and it should be made once every 3 weeks. So you've done all that. What you need from a scheduling perspective is what we call as the changeover matrix. So from a changeover matrix, I can have different changeovers It could be based on the allergens. In this case, you could see that almond to dark is going to be 10 minutes, but then dark to almond. So dark to almond actually takes 20 minutes. So from a scheduling perspective, it makes more sense to go from almond to dark rather than the other way around. So this, again, information that you probably don't have in the existing system, we can help you manage all these different changeover matrices. And once we have the changeover matrix and we call the scheduling engine, the schedule then can get created. And when you look at the schedule, you could see that I have two formats. One is in the form of a worksheet. So you can see this worksheet that says, on this date, you will start with this product, continue with this product. It has the different start times and end times, because there are some people who like this in an Excel style. Just give me a listing of all the products I should make by day and the quantity, the order number, and the duration, and kind of provide me with a way to edit this, which is you can drop down on this and then move it to next day, split the batch, add another product. You can do all these different things with the keyboard and mouse. You can also pivot this and then show this in a pivoted format, what it looks like across time. Okay, so that is for people who are inclined on our Excel look and feel and are familiar with this and say, you know, I'm so used to this, and this is how I like to work. At the same time, we also have a Gantt chart. And if you see that from a Gantt chart perspective, it has the typical Gantt chart where you can drag and drop and see what the different batches that you have. Okay, so we have all these different batches. You can query the batch, and then you can see the details behind it as to what the batch was, what was the bill of material that you have. You can also have a scheduling order-based bill of material. So what you can say is, listen, I have some rework that I like to add on to it, or I have off-spec material that I like to add to it. You can kind of customize the bill of material and say that it doesn't have to be the standard bill of material. I can customize it and then add my own materials to it and edit this and then kind of say, I would like to add another material. So the batches can be edited, and the batches are custom, or the bill of material to that particular batch is specific. It doesn't always have to be the standard bill of material. You can kind of do these kinds of edits. And this, again, is what we send across to the ERP system when it comes to execution time. And as you do in any of these scheduling, you can kind of move this around, drag and drop, and you can also add the downtime batch and say, I'd like to add a downtime to it. I mean, all the standard functionality that you would normally see from a scheduling perspective. So what we try to do is to convert or converge all the different aspects of your supply chain into one single system. So we're talking about coming up with the sales forecast. The sales forecast would be by product, by customer, and it could be by region and by all these different hierarchies, but at the end of the day, it is by customer. And then you can convert that into a warehouse depending on how the historical data said. And that product by a warehouse is what you see from a supply standpoint. And here you look at the throughput, you look at the capacities, you look at the bill of materials, and then you come up with a capacity constraint plan that takes also all this into consideration along with the calendars, along with the batch sizes, and comes up with a plan. Now that plan is at the detail, at the high level, and in the near term is the detail, and that detail then gets scheduled, okay, which is what you see in terms of the schedule. And then you can also see these different orders that you can create from this, whether it's a production order export, a purchase order export, or a transport order that you need to execute to kind of make this plan come together. So all this is done in one single place, and then comes the most important thing, which is running scenarios. Now the scenarios could be run like you say that, listen, what happens if a line goes down for 3 weeks? Okay, let's just say there's a general lockdown and nobody can go to work. What happens to my lines if I shut it down for 3 weeks? Now you could run this as a regular scenario and change the capacity and run the plan against how much of demand you can't meet or how much of inventory will go below target, and gives you the dollars and cents perspective of what's at risk. You can do that. But at the same time, if you're now running into something much more than that, and you would like to kind of say, what if we had another capacity to what if we add another line to our facilities and say that what if we put a project together and expand the capacity on a particular plant? And this is where scenarios come into play. So what this one allows you to do is to run different what-if scenarios. And the what-if scenarios are based on having to run a complete master data mockup. So this could be that I could have a brand new set of customers that you like to see the impact of that on your capacity, on your inventory, and all these different levels. Or it could be that we're adding another line. You want to add a line to a facility, and what does that do to an overall plan? So this is something that you can't do because you don't have that information in the ERP system, but you would like to be able to kind of do such a what-if analysis. And then from that point onwards, like to see how does this impact my overall plan? So this is where scenarios come in. You can kind of create different scenarios, and this is where data shelter comes into play. So in here, what I've done here is I've switched it to the scenario, which is project expansion. And here you could see that I've already created Dallas chocolate packing line 2, which is the new line that we like to kind of put in and see the impact of it. So by right-clicking on it, we have what we call as clone data. Now the cloning can be done either the warehouse level. You can kind of say, what if we add another warehouse? What does that do to our service levels? Or in this case, I was talking about the resources. I could say that clone this line to something else, and then you can copy all these different parameters, which means that you don't have to know the run rate, the changeover, all that. We can just inherit from an existing line, and then you can go and change the rates or change the capacity available. But it kind of provides you with an easy way to kind of do a mock-up of a resource or a facility or a customer or maybe a brand new product range that you want to go into. You can kind of use this tool to kind of clone the data, set it up and say, we like to get into this particular product range, and I'd like to see, will that fit into the existing capacities that we have? So rather than sit and do this in spreadsheets or mock up all the run rates and the capacities and everything, the tool can do a lot of this heavy lifting for you and create such a scenario. Now, once you have that scenario, you create the plan as I showed before in terms of the capacity plan. And once you create the capacity plan and you consolidate the results, we have what we call consolidated scenario compare. Now, this will compare this particular scenario against all other scenarios that you have or against the primary plan that you're running against. So in this case, I'm looking at Dallas, and I am doing it at the product level. And I want to see this in terms of opening inventory as to what that compares between these two different plans. So here what I'm doing is I'm going to take this away from a product perspective because then it's easier to explain. So the point of this exercise is that I've got this different parameters I can compare and say that how was this plan different from the prior plan that I had? So by adding another line, did my inventories come down? Yeah, so you could kind of see that by adding another line, by adding some more capacity, what does that do to our overall cost of the plan? What does that do to the to the inventories that I have? And then you can compare that and see it from that perspective. So that's where the report comes into play.
I'd say let's go to the profitability analysis on promotions,
Yes.
where you see what this one does is it allows for setting up promotions with a cost reduction, which is the rebate, but also with a fixed cost to the promotion. And that's how you get to the analysis of regular revenue would have been this. Discount is so much. The investment in that promotion arena is so much, and this is the net revenue, and you can compare the net revenue on this sold volume against what you would regularly receive. This is by product and by product customer. So if you want to see this by, let's say, chocolate type only.
Package type. Package type is another attribute with values, Unico.
Okay. Whether it's brand or package type, you can see things at an aggregated level. This database is sort of in between Mickey Mouse and real size. If Mickey Mouse is 0 and real size is 100, then I'd say this data set is about 20, 25. But this really works. I mean, the most recent client, Royal Smilde, they have hundreds and hundreds of promotions over history, and some 30 to 40 per week. Yeah, and that's where where it gets interesting, of course. That's where your Excel sheets start to break, and a system can hold it together.
So all the things that you've seen so far is out-of-the-box functionality. If I have the data to fill up these standard tables that we have about 13 tables behind the scenes. One is like the item master, a customer master, a sales order history, bill of materials, inventory. So we have about 13 tables that need to be populated. If you populate those tables with your data, what I've shown you so far is right out of the box functionality. There's no coding to be done. Everything is just straight out of the box functionality, and you will see every single bubble and pop-up and everything that I've shown you so far happen with your own data, provided you just populate the backend tables.
If you found this presentation interesting and think that our system and our company can help you bring structure into your business process, then we'll send you the reading material, and I'm sure there will be other questions, and we'll be happy to answer all the questions, provided that you give us a little bit of time. It takes 9 months to grow a baby. So if you go A to Z, like Royal Smilde did, like Blommer Chocolate did, all the work rolls into getting the right data in the right place. And that brings you for A to Z, so for sales forecasting, supply planning, and scheduling, round about 6 months. And then you should budget for a settling period, because when you start using it operationally, yeah, you discover mistakes in your data, you want to fine tune. So that's how I get to the 9 months to grow a baby. The sales planning and sales forecasting and demand planning bit can go much faster. And the reason for that is that you need much less data. You only need products, customers, warehouses, and sales orders. And those tend to be data elements that are relatively easy, and that there's not a lot of variation around the sales order. I mean, it has a product, it has a warehouse, it has a customer, it has a delivery date, an order date, and a quantity. So there's not a lot that can go wrong around sales order lines, and that's why getting sales forecasting, sales planning off the ground is usually quicker, and that could be as quick as 3 months. We always stay engaged. We either deliver the implementation from Outperform A to Z, if you want a one-stop shop, and say I don't want different players, I want to have one party that I can hold responsible, then your destination is Outperform. And we could even consider teaming up with a consulting party that you already work with. Yeah, I put that into follow-up discussions on what is the best approach for your business problem. We want to listen to where your problems are, where your focus is, and we need to find the best combination of what you need and what we can deliver. Okay, thank you very much. Bye bye.